I'm the Assistant Dean for Admissions and Outreach at UC San Francisco School of Dentistry. We expected a pretty small crowd because it's lunchtime right now, so I'm going to go with you guys. You're lucky. First off, I'd like to apologize. I had a tooth extraction yesterday, number 5, for those of you who know that. It was a vertical split to the root, and I have a post put in for an implant. I'm also on Vicodin, so if I'm speaking a little unclearly, just be sure and raise your hand, throw something at me, tell me to slow down, or repeat what I just said. So what I'm here today to do is to give you some tips about applying strategically to dental school. Because you can dream. Let's see what else happens in here. You could follow your heart, fast-running heart, and you could hope for the best, right? Not when it comes to applying, because you have to apply strategically. What's important about realizing this is that most dental schools have many applications, not just a lot of applications, but applications from people who are qualified. And so they have more than they need to choose a selecting class. And so what you have to do is to maximize your chances for admission is look at this approach strategically. I know you're passionate about becoming a dentist, you're passionate about healthcare, but that in and of itself is not going to be enough to make a competitive application. And so what I have up here are a few tips of things I want you to consider, both for organizing your materials and for how you go through the process that will help make it a much more strategic process, and I think will increase your chances of admission. These are the same guidelines that we use when we're working with our post-bac students at UCSF, who have a very successful rate of getting into dental school. Over the 10 or 15 years of the program, we've probably had about 95 to 97% of them get offered admission. And so these are applicants who are not normally competitive at the beginning, and yet they're still being successful, and we feel that this is part of the reason for that. So the 5 steps are know your schools, organize your materials. We're going to talk about some specifics with statements and supplemental applications, some tips about letters of recommendation, and then, of course, the interview. Yes, ma'am? I'm sure we could arrange for that. I hadn't planned on it, but it's not a problem. So the first one, know your schools. Most people don't really research the schools all that much when they're deciding who they want to apply to. They look at a list. They say, oh, that's in Los Angeles. They've got some beaches. I think I'll go there. Oh, look, that's New York. They've got theater. I like that. That's not the way to do it. There are about 65 accredited schools now. You should research them, and you should start researching them now. Even if you think you know who you want to go to, I would still say take a look, at least briefly, of all the schools. One of the things we recommend, again, with our post-bac students is we split up the schools. They all take 10 or 12. They research them, and then they meet together as a group and share the information. So maybe you can do that with some friends, because you might find some things that you might not have known about, or you might find some assumptions that you made that were false. So for example, you look on a school's website and it says 87% of the students entering this year are residents of that state. So you assume, well, they must have a preference for residents. They're not going to look at me because I'm from out of state. That's a weak assumption. It could be just a matter of the fact that 80% of the applicant pool are state residents, which means more residents are going to be admitted. Or maybe just out-of-state residents decline the offer. Those are the sorts of things you don't want to make an assumption on just because of what's there. You want to call and find out. Do you give a preference? Do you accept out-of-state students? Do you accept international students? Some schools will say, like UCSF, we have no preference. You apply, we're looking at you. Residency doesn't become a factor until after admission. Other schools, for example, if you call Washington, I believe, might tell you your chances are next to 0 of getting in if you're not a Washington resident. So you do want to check those things out. Other assumptions, non-resident tuition. Is it possible for you to gain residency after that first year? Because that may be part of your decision is cost, and you might think, well, if I'm out of state, I have to pay non-resident tuition. In some states, you only pay it for a year, and then you can qualify for residency. In other states, you will never qualify for residency, and you'll have to pay that all the time. Minimum requirements. They might say, my minimum GPA to apply is 3.0. The minimum DAT scores are 21. You want to find out if those are absolutes. Or do they make waivers, or do they ever make exceptions? Now, one school might say, absolutely. We go through the computer goes through the system. Anybody with a 20, automatically denied. The letter gets sent out. Others might say these are very strong guidelines, but we might make an exception. And so you might still want to consider applying. One of the things to keep in mind about statistics, because there's a lot of things that you can misinterpret with them, is that they're really, the ones that you get are descriptive statistics. They're very general. So other things that you might make assumptions on are based off of race, ethnicity, off of gender. Those statistics that you see of an entering class rarely represent a preference on the part of the school. They're more often than not indicative of who applies to the school. And the school can only admit from who applies. So don't necessarily use that information to make a decision whether or not to apply, but use that information to try to identify what areas of your application might need strengthening. So for example, an average GPA might be a 3.56 in the sciences, and you're saying, well, I have a 3.3, there's not a chance in heck that I'm going to get in. What would be more important would be to find out what's the range of GPA of those who are admitted. Maybe the average is 3.56, but maybe the range is 2.8 to 4.0, in which case that means you're not out of the realm of possibility. And so you want to look at that sort of thing. Contacting the schools directly. We talked about this if you were at the panel earlier. If you talk to one school, you've only talked to one school. If you're going to apply to 10 schools, you want to talk to 10 schools. Because you can't assume that anything that applies to one school is going to apply to the other school. In some cases, yes, there are things that are very similar, but in very critical components, the schools might differ from each other. And quite frankly, one of the ways that schools get their applicant pools down to a manageable size is to eliminate or deny people who don't follow instructions. So very simple things like deadlines, fulfilling a course, turning in the right numbers of letters of recommendation, turning in the right types of letters of recommendation, that could automatically get you disqualified or denied, and you haven't even had a chance for a review. And I always feel that the worst way to get denied is for an administrative reason. I mean, if you want to get denied, you want to get denied because they've looked at you and they've decided that you're not a good match. And we'll talk a little bit more about those types of things later. But make sure you contact all the schools. So now I've given you a lot to do. I want you to research the schools. I want you to try to identify any assumptions that you might be making that could be false, and I want you to contact them. Well, how many schools can you realistically do that for? And this is another thing people often ask, like, should I apply to 5 schools? Should I apply to 12 schools, 15, 20 schools? I normally recommend between 10 and 12. Anything larger than that, it gets really unmanageable. It's going to be difficult to make good, strong applications. And I think if you go beyond that, you're basically just checking boxes. You're not really looking at schools to see who might be a good match for me, who might have program components that I'm hoping to get. 10 or 12 is a good round number. You might be a little bit less, you might be a little bit more. Do not, under any circumstance, apply to 1 or 2 or 3 schools. That's probably one of the best ways to decrease your chances of getting admitted to dental school. You want to apply broadly. That's very, very important. Any questions on any of these areas? Yes, sir, Jordan. We do. Somebody calls up, and then I call Dr. Mehan and say, you would not believe who I just spoke to. You better watch out for them. No, we don't. That would be releasing information. It wouldn't be appropriate. Now, we communicate about general ideas, but not about particular applicants. So, other questions? Okay, number 2, organize your information. This is the area where a lot of people fall through. They've decided to apply to 12 schools, and they've got packets and materials and folders and bookmarks on their web pages all over the place, and they can't keep things straight. So the first thing we want you to do is create an application plan. Now, this may work differently for every person. For some people, it's color-coded folders, where it's index cards. Personally, me, I love Excel. I dream about Excel. Okay, I love a workbook. And I can take a workbook and I can put worksheets in there till I'm tired of creating worksheets. And what I do is, you create a worksheet. You have all of your schools on the worksheet. Maybe one sheet's about interviews. One sheet's about supplemental applications. One sheet's about letters of recommendation. Whatever it may be, whatever information you need, get it in one organized area so that you can refer to it, you can check it off when you've done it, and you can look and see where the differences are. Maybe this school requires letters turned in earlier. Maybe this school doesn't really care. Maybe this school has a 2-year limit on the DAT. Maybe this one will take DAT scores from 30 years ago. Whatever kind of things you want to make sure you know what it is for each and every school so that you can track it as it's done. This is, again, where people will mess up a lot. They might think one deadline for one school is the deadline for another school and miss turning in the supplemental application. Or they might not realize so-and-so school has a supplemental application. I find that it's particularly useful when you're looking at letters of recommendation. That's an area where the schools are all over the place. Now, ADSAS will accept 4 letters of recommendation. A lot of schools only require 3, but they'll accept that 4th one as long as it's submitted through ADSAS. Some schools require that you submit the letters through ADSAS. You cannot submit the letters to the school. UCSF is an example of that. Now, that's not problematic per se until you get into what types of letters. And we're going to talk specifically about letters later. But when you're using those 4 letters from ADSAS, those 4 letters have to meet all the different requirements of all the different schools you're applying to. So School A says, we want 2 letters from science professors who taught you in a lecture course. School B says, we want 2 letters from science professors, but it could be either lecture or lab. School C might say, we want a letter from someone who can comment on your performance in science courses. School D might say, we also need a letter from a faith advisor or spiritual advisor. You want to make sure that all of those things match. You have to try to find a happy medium. I think Excel's the best way to do it, but whatever works for you, whatever way you organize your notes currently, or your schoolwork, or your assignments, do that for your applications, and keep it in an area where you can refer to it, and where it's easy to see and easy to track. Point number 2, contact the schools directly. Again, make sure about this information. Make sure about the interviews. Make sure about the letters of recommendation. Let's say you have one school and they've got this really unique request for a letter, and it doesn't quite match up with all the other schools you're applying to. What you might want to do is call them up and say, hey, could I send this letter to you directly? Because I need to use the other letters, for other things. They might say yes. They might say no. But contact the school. Don't go on studentdoctor.net and post a question, okay? Because you're liable to get an incorrect answer. Not necessarily someone was being vindictive and they wanted to hope you got denied because they're trying to get in, although that's been known to happen, but because most people on the site are talking from their personal experience and they're making a generalization and they really don't have the information to make that generalization. Contact the school. Outside resources, that's things like studentdoctor.net. Don't rely on it heavily. Friends and family. A lot of people are going to give you advice. When it comes down to it, go back to the school. Even your advisors, if they say something, or they say they're not sure, they say contact the school, go back to the school. Ultimately, the school is going to be the one that has the best answer for you, and you're going to get the correct answer if you go there. Sometimes it can even be better to email them, because then when you get a response, you get it in writing. So then you have something that says, I asked you what to do here, this is what you told me to do, and I did it, kind of thing. Time management. Don't think that you're going to pull these applications together 2 days before the deadline. And even if you could do that, you don't want to do that. We've always talked about applying early. Applying early is the single most effective means of becoming a more competitive applicant. Because schools are enrolling admission, we're reviewing applications and we're scheduling interviews as soon as we start to receive those applications. Now, even though we might not release offers until December, we're filling up those interview slots. So people who apply earlier, when we get their application and review it, there's many more interview slots that are open. Someone whose application we get late in the cycle, they might be an extremely competitive applicant, but by that point we might have 10 interview slots left and 3 more hundred applications to review. So they're competing for fewer spots. So apply early. Now to apply early, you have to have all these materials organized. You have to make sure all of your transcripts are ordered and sent to ADSAS. You want to check up and make sure those are received. You want to make sure that you've asked the people who are writing your letters of recommendation that they're okay with it and that they're on track. Any other special documentation that you might need that might take time to collect. If any of you went to school outside the United States, there might be additional steps for getting those documents to a school that could take time. And then, of course, time to write your statements, and time to revise your statements, and times to revise your statements, and more time to revise your statements, because you want to revise when it comes to your personal statement. Especially for schools that don't have a supplemental application, that's going to be the primary piece of information for them to find out about you in the hopes that you will stand out from the rest of the applicant pool and get invited for an interview. So leave plenty of time for that. And a revision is not, I'm going to write it today, and then tomorrow I'm going to revise it. A revision is, I'm going to write today, and I'm going to put it away somewhere for a few days so I don't think about it. Like maybe the bottom of your sock drawer, the trunk of your car, give it to a friend, somewhere that gets it physically out of your mind and out of your presence, because then when you come back and you look at it again, you're going to look at it with fresh eyes, and you're going to look at it more like someone who's reading it for the first time. And that's when all those subtle errors start to poke out, when the logic doesn't quite flow, or you've been redundant, or something like that. So you want to leave plenty of time for that. Any questions on any of those before I go forward? Any questions about anything? You guys are a lively bunch. Okay, third one, statements and supplemental applications. A lot of things here. Most of us will probably interview, I would say, well, for us, we probably interview maybe, we get about 1,900 applications a year. We issue about 350 interview invitations. We end up interviewing about 250 people. Now, of those 1,800 applications, I would say a third of them get denied for administrative reasons. They miss deadlines, they're incomplete, they don't return the supplemental application, they don't have DAT scores, things like that. So that still gets us down to about 1,000 or 1,100, and we're only going to interview about 20% of them. So how do we interview those 20%? Well, something in their application catches our eye. Now, we're going to go on the assumption that everything else is fine with regards to academics. We have no doubt that this person can handle the rigor of our curriculum, because that's the first thing any school is going to look at. But after that, we still have hundreds and hundreds of people who can handle the rigor. How do we pick them? Well, something in the essay made us say, wow, I want to meet this person. I want to find out more about them. Something that was unique that stood out. So these are some things to look at when you're filling out either your personal statement. There's the supplemental statements within ADSES, the statement of disadvantage, the statement of academic hardship, those kinds of statements, as well as any questions you might have in a supplemental. First and foremost, what are the focus of these statements? Anyone want to take a gander on that? No. Well, I mean, that's part of it, but whose motivation? What motivation? The individual. That's it. That's the thing. And what a lot of people tell us about is the individual that inspired them, the individual that they look up to, their mentor, the experience that was life-transforming. Those things are all good, and they can be part of an application, but you have to remember the focus is always about you. And so don't spend so much time describing that mentor that you forget to describe yourself. You can say, I had a mentor who got me to do this, but then you talk about yourself. Instead, what we often see is half the essay is dedicated to the mentor. The other thing, an activity. When I was 4 years old, I fell off my tricycle. I knocked out my front tooth. I was in a lot of pain. I went to the dentist. The dentist took away the pain, gave me a beautiful smile, and ever since then, I've wanted to become a dentist. And they go on and on and on and on, step by step about this story. Number one, it's not that unique a story, guys, okay? We've heard it a lot. Same one with you went to the orthodontist, you were shy, the orthodontist gave you a beautiful smile, and now you have great self-confidence. Those are good things, those are valid things, and they're part of your motivation. But don't spend all of your essay telling us that story. That's a sentence or two. What we're interested in is, who are you now? Why do you want to be a dentist? Okay, maybe that was the starting point, but you got to keep the focus on yourself. Your mother was a saint, or she's soon to be. Maybe she's working her way up the steps, but she did all these things that made you admire her, and you want to be just like her. That's wonderful, but again, more about my mother was a saint, she influenced me, and because she influenced me, this is who I am now. I have this quality, I have that quality, I have this goal. Me, 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 me. Be self-centered in this essay. That's extremely important to be competitive. Answering the question. One, answer the question that's asked. There's going to be information you want to get across, but don't try to squeeze it into a question when it's not appropriate for that question. Answer the question completely. Especially in supplemental applications, the questions may have two parts. And oftentimes, people will answer part one, but not part two. So for example, in our supplemental, we normally have a question that says, please use an example of one of your activities that you listed in your ADSES application to tell us about, to provide evidence of your leadership and how that will be applicable to you in your profession and the career. So someone may pick an activity, they start describing the activity, and that's all they do. Someone may pick the activity and talk about their leadership with it, but they don't go on to that last part and say how this is going to be applicable in dental school or in their career. Answer all parts of the question. These, again, are very easy ways that schools can use to eliminate applications. Well, they didn't follow instructions. They didn't answer all the question. Denied. Someone else did. Redundancy. Don't do it. You do not want to repeat information. There's no need to repeat information. You have such a limited amount of space in your application, and what's important is getting across as many details as possible about yourself to build as, I kind of use an analogy of a tapestry. Think of a very intricately woven tapestry. The more details you provide, the more different threads, the more complete the picture, the more interesting it is, the more someone may want to talk to you and invite you for that interview. So when you use the same thing to answer two questions, big mistake. You've lost an opportunity to tell us additional information. If the questions seem related or the activity seems applicable to both, that's fine, but find another activity that's only applicable to one of them and use it for that question, or another example, or another experience. If there are optional sections, and they say, this is optional, you don't have to fill it out, fill it out. Option is another opportunity to give additional information about yourself, so take advantage of it. Maybe there's that one thing that you feel is absolutely critical to who you are, for a committee to understanding who you are and why they should take you, but there's no question that it really fits. That's what that optional section's for. Okay, so make sure you use it. Another one, you'll often get a question on supplementals that says, why should we pick you? Out of all the other hundreds of applicants who are equally competitive, have the same background and experiences, why should we pick you? So I can give you the top 5 wrong answers, okay, maybe top 3. 1, because I really, 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 really want to be a dentist, okay? 2, I really like your school. Your school's great. It's famous. The faculty are exceptional. Good. We already know that. Okay, we know how good we are. You don't have to tell us how big our head is. It's going to make it even bigger. You might say, because I'm going to work really hard, and I'll study, and I'll be good. Again, it's not going to do anything. I mean, they're not wrong, but they're not things that are going to make your application stand out. When you get a question like that, what a school is looking for is, tell us about yourself. What is unique about you? What are you going to bring to the school so that if you're admitted, you will enhance the experience for your fellow students? So that's an opportunity to talk about a unique life experience, insight, perspective, skill, something you have to offer. You say, guys, yeah, I have all that other stuff, and I know everybody else does too, but guess what? If you admit me, I'm bringing this with me, and this is going to be of benefit to my fellow students. Because I don't think anybody else really has this or has something quite like that, or it's not that common, something like that. Tell us what you have to offer. Yes, ma'am? Okay, so perhaps you have particularly strong leadership skills. Perhaps you're very good at community service and organizing. Maybe your teaching skills are good, and you've always been very good at getting together study groups. Bilingual, multilingual. Perhaps you're a little bit older student, and you have some life experience to offer. Maybe you came from a different profession that gave you a different perspective that will allow you to look at dentistry slightly different than others have looked at. It can really be anything. It's how you talk about it and how you explain it and how you show how it's going to be applied. Yes?
How should we frame those ideas in our papers? Like when you say, what can we bring to the table? I've switched my major like 3 times or 4 times.
So you're a generalist? Okay. So.
And CC, my first year, I've got 111 units. I've got art background, theater background, sport background. How do I frame that?
But what of that is relevant? What do you feel is relevant? What of that have you kept that you feel is still an active part of you that you can apply to dentistry? Think for yourself, not for the committee, but as I'm becoming a dentist, how is this art background going to help me?
Because it's an artistic. The way I would go about it personally is that because I wouldn't use any of those extracurriculars that I have, I would use like my life and how my mom went to rehab and how I've been a better student. Because in high school I scored a 2.2, and I don't know how I graduated, but that's how I graduated. And then in college I got a 3.0, and then I'm still booming up like from not doing anything. And I would say I'm a determined person and an individual that's going to make a difference in this community because I've made a difference in myself. I can make a difference in public health. Is that?
Well, you're getting it. You're working through it. So determination is the quality that you're describing. Yeah. Okay? So you want to talk about your determination, examples of your determination, and apply how that determination would be useful or helpful. So get down to the quality of the thing was not about your mother or about your grades, but what you were trying to sell there was, I have great determination.
So, like, I did a dental drive where I collected 100 toothbrush packets of toothpaste, dental floss, and toothbrushes to give to the kids that are less fortunate that have.
Okay, too much information on the activity already. This is what I mean about focusing on yourself. You did a dental drive. What did you need to do to make that a successful dental drive? What did you need?
I mentored 8th graders.
Okay, so mentoring. What else?
I did extra research for
Research skills.
letters. I was motivated because it was like.
That's softy. Give it another one.
Okay.
Organizational skills.
Yeah, and I got groups together where I made videos to describe to 8th graders microflora.
So you've got teaching, you've got organization, you've got a variety of qualities. Those are the kinds of things you want to discuss there. With the schools, we're not looking necessarily for specific facts or accomplishments. When we ask for dental experience, it's not so much so that we can have a number of hours, but so that we have a sense that you understand what the profession's about and that you can talk about the profession intelligently. When we're looking at extracurriculars, it's not so we have a long list on your resume, but it's what those extracurriculars represent about you with regards to personal characteristics. So it's the characteristics that you want to highlight, interpersonal skills, organization, things like that. Keep the focus on that. Say, in this activity, this was a way for me to highlight my strong organizational skills. And I think these skills will be a benefit to me in dental school because not I collected 500 toothbrushes and 300 packets of dental floss, and we don't care about that. Okay? Other questions? Okay, so answering the question completely, redundancy, avoid it. Grammar, syntax. Guys, there's a thing called spell check. It's been around for a couple of decades or more now. So what that means is there's no real excuse for errors in your materials. We expect them to be flawless. If they're not, there's a couple of things that come to mind. One, either this person's careless and doesn't pay attention to detail. And for people who are going to be operating in millimeters, we want them to be able to pay attention to detail. Careless, they don't really care that much about this program. Somebody else did. Or two, it could mean that there's a significant concern or a red flag about someone's written communication skills, that the ability is not at the level we want, it's not at a graduate professional school level. Another way for schools to really knock out hundreds of applications. Now, I'm not saying you've got one typo and they're going to knock you out, but when we see something that's full of typos or full of bad grammar, it's probably not going to get an interview, even if the person has a 4.0, and high 20s on the DAT. Because our assumption, number one, is that you've also had someone help you with this. So if it's still a mess, that just says a lot about you, okay? Grammar, syntax, work on that. That's why you need time for those revisions. Especially when it comes to the logic and the flow. You want to make sure it's going to happen there. I would say in the students I worked with in my post-bac program, each of them did a minimum of 7 to 10 revisions, significant revisions of their statement over a period of probably 3 or 4 weeks. When you first start writing, don't worry about this too much. Get the ideas down, the content down, and then you just start tightening it and focusing it. Just get the ideas down and write. Reapplicants. This is a special note for you guys. If you're reapplying, in general, most schools don't frown upon reapplicants, but we do want to see that it's a different person who's applying, that there's something substantively different that you've done since your last application. So the biggest mistake that reapplicants make is they apply too early. They haven't done anything. They've gotten admitted to that master's program or that post-bac program, but they haven't started taking classes yet, or they don't have grades for it. When it comes to statements, the big thing they do is they take the exact same statement from last year and they cut it and they paste it into the next year's application. That's about 100% way to get denied, okay? Because we're saying, okay, what is this person? Are they a total slug? Did they spend the past year eating Doritos on the couch? They couldn't even write a new statement? And don't just change the first words in the first paragraph or maybe reorganize the paragraphs. Completely new statement. You're a reapplicant, so you're applying from a completely new perspective, and that should be reflected. You should have developed your goals more. You should have learned more about the profession. You should have refined different things that you want to do. And that goes for not only your statement in AdSAS, but any statements or questions that are in the supplemental applications. That's really a critical piece of advice. Questions on any of these? Okay, letters of recommendation. Types of letters, letter writers, factors to consider, and again, reapplicants. Types of letters. Make sure you know exactly what type of letter a school requires and how many of them they require, whether it's a minimum or a requirement. This is another way that many schools will eliminate you because you don't follow the instructions. If you need 2 letters from science professors in a lecture course and you only submit 1 and that second letter was a research advisor, you might get denied. Okay? Or if you're missing that critical letter that's very unique from that school, you might get denied. You don't know how strict they're going to be about this, so that's the thing that goes in the application work plan, and make sure you're checking it off. Now, I'll give you an example. At UCSF, we're one of the more liberal schools when it comes to this. We require 3 letters, or a committee letter in lieu of those. Whatever the case, they all have to be submitted through AdSAS. If you submit 4, we'll take that 4th one into consideration. We're not going to ignore it. Now, our first letter says, someone who can, a professor, someone who can comment on your coursework. The second letter says a research mentor, an advisor, or someone like that. And then the third one says anyone of your choice, okay? Preferably not your grandmother, right? We have to take letters with a grain of salt on who's writing them. But that also tells us something about your judgment, who that third letter is. Let's say that your first letter is from a professor, your second letter is from a research mentor, and then the third letter is from the leader of the nonprofit you volunteered for, but you've in your application said that you worked for a dentist for 10 years and there's no letter from that dentist. We might wonder why. Okay, so choose those things carefully. I can tell you something else about UCSF. We don't really check to make sure that those are the 3 types of letters you have. We look to see, do you have 3 letters? Yes, sir.
That seems like one way to really stand out is the letter of your choice, making sure that not only that's relevant, but compelling. Is that correct?
It could be, any of these can be a standout if you consider there are certain qualities. One, who that person is not as important as how well they know you, okay? So it's the quality of the relationship, means they're going to provide more detail. So you have to get a letter from a professor. You've got 2 professors. In Professor John's class, you got a C, okay? In Professor Amy's class, you got an A. And so you're like, I'm going to go talk to Dr. Amy. Well, what if the last time you saw Dr. Amy was in Chem 1A 3 years ago? Whereas Dr. John over here, you go to his concerts, and you've been maintaining contact with him, and he knows that the reason you got a C in that class is because that was the semester you got mono. And it's not indicative of who you really are as a student. He knows you better. He may be the better person to write the letter because you've maintained contact with them. Don't assume that just because you got the A, that's the good letter writer. So that's one thing. How long you've known them, how well you've known them. Don't just go to somebody and say, would you write me a letter of recommendation? You want to go up to them and you want to say, I'd like you to write me a letter of recommendation. Can you write me a good one? They'll answer you honestly. They'll say, I'd love to. They might say, I'd love to, but I've got a grant due next week and I don't have the time to do it. They might say, I'm sorry, who are you again? Okay? Make sure they can do that. Give them a copy of your personal statement, whatever draft form it's in. Give them a copy of your resume or CV. Let them know a focus. You might want to pick someone who can highlight a particular quality. Like maybe what you're highlighting in your application is your leadership. And so you call the person who was at the volunteer organization you were with and you go, hey, Sammy, I'd like you to write me a letter of recommendation. Can you write me a good one? Hey, Joe, I'd love to write you a letter of recommendation. What do I got to do? Well, one of the things I'm trying to sell on my application are my leadership skills. You've seen evidence of that, so I was hoping you could focus on that in the letter. They can write about whatever they want, but there's nothing that says you can't give them any guidance on that and do that. Those are the qualities I think that make a better letter, rather than just saying, I have a letter from a Nobel laureate, and the Nobel laureate writes, yes, I administer Chem 1A. It's administered through a series of 35 TAs. So I don't actually see the students, but I do know that the student got an A in the course, which put them in the top 2% of the course, and here's a copy of the syllabus. And I was told that the student, attended lecture and asked really good questions. Nothing wrong in that letter of what it's saying, except that it doesn't tell us anything about you. It doesn't make you stand out. Whereas Sammy's writing there and saying, boy, you should have seen this person in action. I know this person, and I know they'll be good for this. So letters from TAs, you got to weigh it with how well they know you to how well they know the field, the profession, and experience writing letters of recommendation, things like that. Those are some of the factors. Ask them in plenty of time. Yes, ma'am?
So what about professor from community college? I know my professors.
And you've maintained contact with them. Okay, one of them might be good for a letter, but I would still try to get a letter that's more current from someone who's currently teaching you to meet one of those requirements. Also, keep in mind, coursework from a community college by definition is lower division coursework. And what they're trying to assess here is your ability to handle graduate level coursework or upper division coursework. So someone from a 4-year can be good. If you don't know them well yet, it's time to start calling people up and asking them out for coffee, okay? Or saying, can you meet them for coffee? Go to office hours, even if you completely understand everything they've said in lecture and you're getting an A+, go to office hours and talk to them. Ask them to tell you about their research, okay? They'll never shut up. You'll get to know the people that way. Make that effort. And I know it's hard in a big institution, but you can do it because every year there are people who do it. They're the few who go there and sit there and talk to the professor while the professor's coming to me saying, no one ever comes to my office hours. I sit there by myself and it's the same 2 people again and again. Okay, so if you get and you go and you have 5 people there, you're going to get a better letter from that person. Other questions? Yes? Committee letters are looked at differently from some schools. The thing about a committee letter is they're probably going to interview you and then write the letter. You have to make sure you get across all the relevant points that they have to know. So it's not that we rank those letters better or worse than any others. And you could also probably still submit additional letters because AdSess will take 4 and the committee letter is only going to fill 1 spot. Other questions? Reapplicants, at least 1 new letter. Yes, sir. It's going to depend on where it fits in with the other letters. It's going to depend upon the institution and what they're talking about. Keep in mind, a letter from a choir director is not going to be able to comment probably on your intellectual capacity for biochemistry. But if you want that person to write about your community service, that could be a very good choice. Some schools require specific letters like that. For example, if you apply to Loma Linda, you need to have a letter from someone who's a spiritual advisor because it's a faith-based school and that's an important part of their program. Some schools will specifically tell you, we do not want letters from ministers, rabbis, priests, or anyone like that. We won't accept them. So you have to kind of double check back and forth. What I don't like to see is when someone gets 3 letters or 4 letters all from science professors. Even if they're all good letters, they all tend to focus on kind of the same thing because they all tend to know the person from the same perspective. And so I do like to see a little bit of variety there. Reapplicants, I was going to say, you need at least one new letter. Even if the school doesn't require it, you should have at least one new letter because you want to have letters recent. And that letter, even if it's from one of the same people who wrote a letter last year, should comment again on the fact that you're a reapplicant and what you've done in the previous year. Don't just keep submitting the same letters that are a year old or 2 years old. Please don't submit a letter that says, John is interested in applying to medical school and I think he'll be a great physician. If you've changed your path, get that letter updated. Other questions before we move to the last section? Okay, the interviews. Again, contact the school. You get an invitation, don't assume you're going to know what's going to happen on that day. Contact them and find out. The interview process can vary drastically from school to school. You'll see all sorts of formats. For example, if you go to Temple, I hope you're ready to get videotaped. Okay? Because basically what Temple does is they put you in a room, they put a camera in front of you, and they say you've got 5 minutes to tell the admissions committee why we should admit you. Okay, so get your hair cut and bring your makeup. If you go to Michigan, you're going to get what's known as multiple mini interviews, which is sort of like speed dating. There's going to be about 10 or 12 stations, and you're going to get a few minutes at this one, the whistle blows, you go to the next one, you go to the next one. And each station is going to do something different and assess something differently. You go to USC, one of the components is going to be PBL, problem-based learning component, to see how you fit into their teaching style. You want to know these things so you're not going into them blind. You go to UCSF, you're going to have 2 interviews, one with a student, one with a faculty member. They're one-on-one, they're separate, but they are equally weighted. You're also going to have a writing sample, which is not as big of a deal as everyone seems to think it is. It's not knowledge-based. We're looking at your written communication skills. What else about that? Is it going to be a team interview? You want to find out, is it closed file, open file, or partial? Some schools, when you go to them, the interviewers know nothing about you. All they've been given is said, interview this person. Others have had to be able to review your entire application. Others might have only had a component, like the statement. Those are things good to know, because if someone has an open file interview, they're probably going to pull something out of your application and ask you about it. So you want to make sure you remember that you wrote down that you climbed Mount Everest last year. So when they ask you about it, there's no blank look on your face, okay? Make sure you're prepared for those types of questions. Preparing for questions, I think it was Ryan Panetta and Brian from Case who said, don't memorize answers. And that's a great piece of advice, because if you have rote answers, inevitably what's going to happen is they're going to ask you a question that's really not the same question you prepared the answer for, but it seems really close. So you read out that remote answer. Well, aside from sounding like a robot, insincere and over-prepared, they might question whether or not you have good comprehension skills because you didn't answer the question that was asked. Okay? So give some thought to typical questions, but don't memorize answers. Be yourself. Don't be who you think we want you to be, because you're probably going to be wrong anyway. Okay? Be yourself. Most of the schools will tell you the interview process is a matching process. The idea is, are you a match for our school? And to give the school an opportunity to see if we're a match for you. I'm sorry, reverse that statement. So you want to be yourself. If you pretend to be somebody else and you get admitted, you're going to have to pretend to be that person for 4 stressful years, and that's liable to cause a psychotic break. We don't want that. None of us do. If it's not a match, it's not a match. It's better for you to know that now. Answer honestly. Let's see, your questions. Almost everybody will give you an opportunity to ask questions of them, of the interviewer. To me, when I'm in manager mode and I'm interviewing people for a job, that's the most telling part of the interview, the questions that the person asks me. I get more information about that person and who they are and whether or not I think they'll be a match and what they're going to bring to the table by what they're asking me rather than what I've asked them. It tells me that, one, have they researched the job? Have they researched the program? Are they enthusiastic about it? Is their thought process shallow, superficial, or is it at a deeper level? Come with some good questions, and come with questions that are specific to that institution. Okay? And remember, when they say, why do you want to go to University of the Pacific? What do you tell them? Because I really, really, really like your school, and I think your professors are great, okay? Now, when you come to UCSF, when we ask you that question, what are you going to tell them? No answers, nothing? You like the research there, okay? And you want to do research. Or you speak 15 languages, and you know that their clinic is very, very diverse. Something unique, something interesting. Any other questions about interviews? Okay. So that's basically the presentation. I wanted to make sure I left some time for any kind of specific questions about applying, things that you have, any interest in. Yes, sir.
In regard to like a potential withdrawal from a class due to extenuating circumstances, does that have to be like listed or?
You're going to list it in the ADSAS application. You have to list your entire transcript. So W's and incompletes will be shown there. It has to match. Whether or not you have to discuss it or bring it up is going to depend upon the extent of it. You know, you withdrew from one course your sophomore year, probably not a problem. You withdrew from a semester or a quarter, or you have a history of W's sprinkling through, we're going to want to know why. Other questions? You've got everything answered. You guys are all ready to apply. Who's applying currently? Yes, sir.
Sorry, another question. With
Okay.
regard to the hand-eye coordination and the tactile thing, I mean, is there some kind of test that schools want to see in regard to?
It will depend, again, on the school. That's what the PAT is supposed to measure, visual hand-eye coordination. Now, there's a lot of debate about whether or not it actually does. Some schools place a lot of emphasis on that. Other schools have an approach that we can teach you the hand skills. We're not going to give you a separate test or look at anything like that. So that's one of those ones where you definitely want to look at the schools. We pay very little, if any, attention to the PAT score. Don't blow it off. But I'm just saying, it's not something that's going to probably make a decision, admissions decision. Come to think of it, there's virtually nothing as one thing in and of itself that will help us make an admissions decision, because we are looking at things much more holistically. So, yes, ma'am. We do, but just listing it doesn't mean anything. You know, when we're looking at something like your first generation, economic hardship, academic disadvantage, whatever the case, you have to contextualize it and tell us. Because of this was something that happened, but guess what? Because of this, I learned this, or this is evidence of my ability to overcome a challenge. Especially when it comes to disadvantage and hardship, a sob story, however relevant, however true, however tragic it is, in and of itself is not going to give you points. We don't do pity points. What we want to know about that story is how that story might have made it more difficult for you to get to where you're at now, and what you had to do to get to where you're at now. Because that represents qualities that are applicable in the profession and in school. That's what's important about when you're relating to us your background experiences. Not that I had this hardship, but that because of this hardship, I am now a stronger person because I've developed this. And that second component is what people often fail to bring up. That's about it, guys. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the rest of the conference. Have a good day.